I think they misunderstand the threat from Russia. To be honest with you, I mean the thought of Russia invading. I mean they might test the water by minor border incursions, but the thought of the Russian army invading a NATO country, is to me preposterous. I mean I've seen them fight personally, and they're a joke. And even at the start of the war here, I mean, there's obviously a lot of them here, and they got a lot of ammunition and weaponry, etc. But even at the start of the war, when they had all their units up to strength, they still couldn't beat the Ukrainians. I mean, the Ukrainians obviously fought tooth and nail, and they had a lot of Western support from some companies, at least, even countries, at least, even at the start. But I think the threat from Russia to NATO is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings with a lot of people.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And this time we're joined by former British Army officer Simon Woodiwiss. Simon was an infantry officer before working round the world as a security specialist managing risks for large infrastructure companies. And he's now based in Ukraine as director of Objective Ukraine, providing security risk management, training and business support. Simon, welcome back to Frontline. It's good to see you again.
Okay.
Are you joining us from Kyiv following emergency power cuts in response to a massive countrywide attacks by Russia on Ukraine's energy infrastructure? How are you getting on? Because Kyiv has come under sustained attack in recent days.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes. I mean, it's a lot harder in other parts of the country. We're not getting shot at quite as much as people in other towns closer to the front lines. It's very manageable. It's very manageable indeed. The heating's working. Ukrainians get on top of the problems very quickly. They work very hard and have a lot of foreign support to make sure that things, I'm pretty sure, are not going to be as bad as people back home might think this winter.
And it was only last week that the US and other embassies had to close because of a potential massive attack that had been reported. What effect did that have on the capital? Because, I mean, just from your first answer, you seem fairly kind of relaxed, I would say, and fairly used to these kind of things. But the actual news of a potential attack on the US embassy, amongst others, did that have much of an impact?
Yeah, a lot of people use it as an excuse to stay at home. It was very COVID-esque in that regard. I don't want to sound too glib about things, but as soon as the Americans put something on their website and started the ball rolling, a lot of embassies followed suit. I'm sure a lot of embassies don't share the same intelligence that the Brits and the Americans have. So, as I said, as soon as the rumours started flying around and things started appearing on official websites, a lot of people decided to stay home and catch up on daytime TV. Working from home.
And you personally, what was your response when you heard that?
It affected a bunch of meetings for me, and we just postponed them, and then we carried on with other stuff. It wasn't really a big deal.
I mean, when in the last few days, there have been sustained air raid warnings, people having to go down to the air raid shelters much more frequently than usual. But I take it from the kind of your response, you're kind of living life more or less as usual and not going down there, and it's become more the norm now. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people around the country do not go down into the shelters. This has been going on for over 1,000 days now, and that takes its toll. People take calculated risks. There's a lot of apps that show you what the incoming threat is. People decide whether or not to go down. It depends also on whether or not you live near to infrastructure sites or what part of a town you might live on. I mean, the drones can fly around the country and come in from different angles, but when it comes to ballistic missiles or glide bombs, they generally have a similar trajectory. So a lot of people make a risk assessment on a personal level.
Can we talk about the missile attack on Dnipro last week? Experts will be trying to find out as much as they can about the Oresnik intermediate range ballistic missile.
Yeah.
What can you tell us? What do you know?
Well, I don't know anything new, I'm sure. It's good to know that the hotline between Russia and America is still working. They call each other when there's a launch and when they're testing stuff, and apparently that was used. Initially, the chat was that it was an ICBM. I think that was mainly down to present company excluded media hysteria. First of all, people thought it was an RSO-26, which is a Rusbek or something else, Rusbek, which has 4 MIRVs. MIRV stands for Multiple Independently Targeted Re-entry Vehicle. Then later on, the news came out that it was an updated version of that on a Oresnik, which has 6 MIRVs. And I think people really cottoned onto the fact that it was something different when footage started appearing online showing MIRVs entering through the cloud cover. and they slowed these down, and they basically looked exactly what most missile tests look like when those things are coming down. It's an area weapon when it's used like that. They didn't have any warheads loaded with anything. They were just empty MIRVs or MIRVs, and so in that respect, it's just another case of the Russians using weapons to terrorize civilian population. These things went everywhere. Russian ICBMs or IRBMs in this case are not known for their accuracy. Same goes for Chinese stuff. That's why they've historically always had much larger warheads. Whereas the stuff that America's produced, and obviously France to a lesser extent, they're far more accurate and they don't need such large warheads. But this thing came down and sprayed its MIRVs all over the place and wasn't good.
And as you say, sent without explosives and at such a high cost. And you say the point is to spread terror, but it's a very expensive way to do it for comparatively little damage.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a figure $50 million was the cost. I mean, that's how much the equivalent might have cost. I would imagine the equivalent back in America would cost a lot more than that. But it doesn't cost that much to make these sort of things in Russia, I imagine. But as far as value for money is concerned, the effect it had on the West, as I said, media hysteria, and the effect that it had on general populations around the world, it was probably good call. Well, not a good call, but you got a lot of bang for his buck, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, and he's certainly, President Putin, capitalising on it now, because he's now saying he has a handful ready for combat and they'll use them again. He also claims that these missiles cannot be intercepted. Is that right?
Well, I think they probably can if you got THAAD, which stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Air Defence, I think, which is a it's a six-pack missile on a mobile launcher. So it looks not dissimilar to a Patriot, but obviously larger, and there's six tubes on the back of each launcher. These things are very expensive. I'd be very surprised if America positioned any of those in Ukraine. Although there is talk of them having done that in Israel, so if they're going to do that for there, then they might want to do it here. But a lot of things happen for other countries that don't happen for Ukraine, sadly, because of the red lines that everybody's scared about. Short answer, yes, they can be intercepted at various stages of their trajectory.
And what about Ukraine? Does it have air systems it can develop to help itself?
What you need is a THAAD to knock one of these things down. So Terminal High Altitude Area Defence System. It's a bit like a Patriot, but it's much more capable. You get, I say it's a bit like a Patriot. It comes off, it has a similar looking launcher, but you have 6 missiles on the back of a transporter instead of 4. These things can knock down, they can knock down MIRVs at a fairly high altitude. There's also a ship and shore-based system that America's been using for a while. So it's called Aegis Ashore. Aegis is the code name for the actual radar system. But they have missiles that are co-located with those radar systems. I think in Poland, I think maybe in Romania as well. But don't quote me on that last bit. And a lot of their ships have them. Obviously, that's not something that can be transported from an existing land-based system in an Eastern European country, or a ship that's not in the Black Sea. So really, the only thing that could bring something like this down is a THAAD. I'm not sure if America would position those here, because it would require the use of American troops to operate them. And they're reticent about having boots on the ground openly.
Intermediate range ballistic missiles are typically meant for long range nuclear strikes thousands of kilometres away, and this one flew just 700 kilometres. If it is intended as a warning to the West in the light of attacks by Storm Shadows and ATACMS into Russia, and as you said, there was media hysteria about it, how do you think it should be regarded by Ukraine's allies and their leaders?
Well, again, I don't want to sound glib about things like this, but the number of lines that have been drawn in the sand by the little man in Moscow is just ridiculous. And a lot of the things that he's been saying recently he's just regurgitating what's happened, what he said before. So this new set of doctrine, or this new policy that they've been talking about, it's just things that have been said over the past couple of years, in fact, in some cases. But so I don't think it's something that people should lose much sleep about. As I said, one should never talk of nuclear weapons lightly, or any kind of weapon. But I'm sure there's a lot of people in the West that will be getting their knickers in a twist about this, when actually they should just be ramping up the support for Ukraine.
And according to TASS, the Russian state news agency, Russia's still planning to use Sarmat, its intercontinental ballistic missile, on combat duty. But one exploded on the test launch site in Russia in September. I mean, it's beset with problems. So that threat right now, it's empty, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it. Well, I think it probably is quite empty because, I mean, do they actually work? I mean, all the tests seem to be going wrong. I'm sure they'll get them figured out at some point, but I think it's just another example of Putin rattling things over in the Kremlin and waiting for people to react in the West, as they do.
What do you consider to be the most important developments to watch in the conflict right now?
Recruitment, I think, probably. It's an ongoing problem. The Ukrainians have got a finite resource in that respect. There's a lot of Ukrainians abroad that could come back and fight for their country if they felt like it. There's a lot of people here that I think could step up to the plate. There's definitely a feeling in some parts of many towns that the war is something that other people do. There's a lot of people who give very valuable service in humanitarian organisations. There's a lot of people who make drones and are involved in the defence industry, all of which have a great impact and help out. But I think a lot of people here could maybe look at themselves in the mirror and reassess their role, their current role, and think maybe they should be in uniform.
And on the subject of manpower, Ukraine is considering building 14 new brigades with recruits. Yep. Is that the right thing to do, or would it be better to replenish the existing ones?
Well, it's not for me to tell the Ukrainians how to do things, although I have a lot of opinions, as you know. I think forming new brigades is there are plus points and negative points to things like this. If we look at how some of the unblooded, for want of a better phrase, divisions that came ashore on D-Day on the 6th of June 1944, how some of the divisions that hadn't seen any combat before, especially on the American side. Yeah, I think there's a strong argument to say that what you could do is beef up the brigades you've got currently. So send a lot of battle casualty replacements, as many as you can, to get those brigades up to strength, and then maybe split them in half. Just like cells splitting. Create a twin of something good that's already out there that's got combat experience, and then dilute the new brigade, or dilute both brigades with new recruits. But forming brand new brigades, I think probably comes with more negative points.
In terms of the British support for Ukrainian forces and their manpower problems, what more could be done?
Training in country, I think, is the way forward. It costs a lot and takes a long time to take Ukrainians out of Ukraine back to the UK and other countries in Europe. I think a lot of that time and expense could be spent on doing things in country. Obviously, there's all sorts of things to consider there. I think it's a natural progression, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later. More training in country with a lot more ammunition and equipment given to training units in Ukraine is vital.
Simon, how much can you tell us about the international support and training of Ukrainian troops in country?
Well, first of all, I'm not working for the British government, and I never have done out here. I have a commercial organisation, but as far as I'm aware, the UK is still leading the world when it comes to in and out of country training support. And the UK does a lot more than people probably imagine in and out of Ukraine in all respects, and that's something to be proud of. That's something to be promoted. There's also there are lots of options to training people in country with your own troops on the ground, which I understand hasn't happened yet. It's the official line, and there's a lot of private companies that can give non-lethal aid and non-lethal training support. And lethal training support as well. There's a lot of people here prepared to step up to the plate and fill the roles that other countries' governments are not yet willing to take.
Russian forces are making the fastest advances since the early days of the 2022 invasion, according to analysts and war bloggers. How are they making those advances?
Okay, the Ukrainians are. I feel very strongly on this point, actually. The Ukrainians are. The average age is about 43 of the combat troops, guys and girls in the front line. That's quite old. And these guys, and well, especially the guys, they don't look like 43-year-olds back home. They've had a tough post round in a lot of cases. They're not as fit or as or as healthy in some cases. Back in other Western countries, they're not as well equipped, they're not as well trained, they're not as well led in a lot of cases, and they're getting shot at. And, they've been doing this for coming up to 3 years in some cases. They're tired. So when the Russians are pushing, it's not because they're not making larger gains now because the Russians are doing something that's particularly effective. The Russians are pretty low standard across the board. So the reason the Ukrainians are falling back is because their flanking units are getting rolled up. So then obviously a unit if a flanking formation gets pushed back, then obviously you need to consider withdrawing. Otherwise, you could get outflanked by the enemy. So that's one reason why you see multiple units falling back when the Russians might only be advancing on an axis somewhere else. Also, I think a problem here. The fields you get down in the south, some of them are very, very large. It could be 1 kilometre or 1.5 kilometres long. So frontline battalion formations the troops will occupy the tree lines. There'll be trenches in the tree lines. They don't have positions in the middle of the fields, of course. So when they fall back, historically they've fallen back to the tree line behind them. Well, if a battalion, say, occupies a 3 kilometre deep position, that's a lot of tree lines. But behind the battalions that the Ukrainians have got here, there's not a great deal of defensive action going on, not a great deal of defensive engineering going on. So a lot of money and time has been put into building these defence lines all around the country, but they're way too far back. So they've been put in place out of drone and out of artillery range, which is way too far behind frontline battalions to be of use to them immediately. So what we're seeing is initially the Russians would push these troops back, and they'd fall back tree line to tree line, and they might make a few hundred meters in one day, or maybe 1 kilometer over a couple of days. But when they get to the end of that battalion and there's nothing behind, what's left of that frontline formation then has to fall all the way back to the next set of positions that have been prepared, maybe leaving some standing patrols and observation posts in between instead of lots and lots of prepared positions. What has been lacking here is support for frontline troops from an engineering perspective. There needs to be more digging going on here. There could be a lot more civilian contractors involved. Obviously, there's a threat from artillery and drones, so that's why a lot of stuff gets put in place too far back. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Russians are now advancing far more than they were beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. Throw into the whole of that mix the kind of ammunition problems that troops are having. What kind of problems are they having with quality? Because I've been hearing reports that they've had problems of things like mortars misfiring on the front line.
I think
is that widespread?
I'm sure the ammunition that's coming from the West is of a decent standard. It's when you have stuff that's been produced and stored or produced for and stored in countries that don't have the same sort of husbandry standards that we have, the same sort of storage standards that have to be adhered to. When you have mortar rounds so a mortar round has, it comes with, it's an actual bomblet, and then around the base of the bomblet you put these little plastic clips which are filled with a propellant charge, and you can add so many to make it go further, or you can, but if they haven't been stored properly, and a lot of Soviet-style Soviet boxes are made of wood and they're not wrapped properly, the actual ammunition, the propellant charges can become waterlogged, or even if there's a little bit of dampness in them, it will affect the way that the bomb comes out of the barrel. So I think that's something I've seen personally outside of Ukraine, and I think that's probably something that's happening in a lot of areas. But as far as the quality of Western supplied ammunition is concerned, I don't think Ukraine's got anything to worry about with that. I'm sure some people might contradict me on that. I know there are some dodgy Stingers knocking around, batch 1 Stingers that were given by Western European countries initially, but a lot of the stuff that's coming now is new.
I'm really keen to talk also about something that you flagged up, which is the effect that cyber attacks are having on Ukraine's military. Can you tell us a bit more about what you know about the Russian hackers are targeting and with what success?
Well, the one thing I will say is that Russian cyber attacks. I mean, we've been under attack from Russia in the West for a decade at least. The UK has regular attacks made against it by Russia and other states. These things are proven by our security service. They're followed back to source, and they're quite clearly in places like Russia, North Korea, and China. So we've been under cyber attack, and we've been having cables cut under the sea for a long, long time. And these attacks do take a toll on lives. They don't just cost a lot of money. when you put in malware into a hospital, you shut down hospital systems because of power cuts, or actually shut down all sorts of programs that these places are used, then lives are lost. We are seeing the same thing happening here on a wide scale. It's not just cyber attacks against military formations. Ukrainians are having to deal with all sorts of problems in government institutions and hospitals, all sorts of public and private offices, and it's taking a toll on life, and it's obviously costing the economy a lot as well. There are things you can do to harden yourself against this. There's equipment out there that's very easily available. It's very easy to use. It's by no means overly expensive. And I think a lot of governments are now looking at, so a lot of departments are now looking at buying those, and just to harden their networks.
Rumours are circulating about the future of the head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency, General Budanov. What are you hearing? I mean, you have heard about this before. I know you're aware of these rumours. What kind of impact would it have if he were to be removed? And what do you know about what is going on?
I mean, these rumours fly around all the time, and there is a turnover here that's unprecedented in some cases. But General Budanov has done a lot of good work. He's a very busy man. He's got his fingers in a lot of operations, of course, as his job dictates. I think to remove him at this stage would be possibly as problematic as removing someone like General Zaluzny was initially. I think the man needs to be left in his position to carry on the fight.
And since, and even before the election of Donald Trump, there's been incessant discussion outside Ukraine about what kind of negotiations might take place to end the war. What is your perspective on those discussions from inside the country, and what your Ukrainian contacts tell you when you hear the reporting of them?
I mean, people are worried, of course, that the wrong decision will be made, and the right decisions need to be made by Ukrainians. And this is their fight. We're helping them to defend themselves, but things like this need to be decided by the Ukrainians. It's not for someone to come in from abroad and to tell them, well, we can advise them on how to fight, and obviously that's pretty vital in a lot of cases. But as far as a peace deal is concerned, I mean, imagine if someone came and invaded and took over the whole of Cornwall, Devon, and Somerset, and then someone else came in and told us that we had to give that up. We wouldn't be very happy about that. This is something Ukrainians need to sort out, and people outside the country need to get that in their heads. It's naive and arrogant in the extreme to expect otherwise. That being said, Donald Trump has written a lot of checks. Hopefully he can cash them for everyone's benefit. I look forward to seeing what the man can do. I think he's got a lot of positive points about him. There's a lot of negative points about him, but that goes with everybody. But he said a lot of things on the election trail. Now it's time to see what happens.
And he's in the process of choosing the people who will surround him when he becomes president. His pick for Ukraine envoy is the former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. He had put forward a plan for what he considers a formal US policy to seek a ceasefire and negotiated settlement. He wants to force both Kyiv and Moscow to the negotiating table. He wants to freeze the battle lines. He wants continued support for Ukraine if they enter into negotiations, but threatens to stop the support if they don't, and also more support for Ukraine if Russia refuses to join, and also pause the accession to NATO to please Russia. I mean, when you hear those we don't know what will or will not happen in the end, and how much of that Donald Trump may or may not like. But when you hear those kind of things reported, what kind of reaction does it get in Kyiv?
I think Kyiv's quite different from. There are many people here that are very different from people in other parts of the country. So if you've got nothing to do with any part of the southeast of the country or the south that's been taken over, and you don't have any relatives there, and you've got a business here, and you're not really as involved as you could be, as I've said before, then you might think differently and might favour that sort of thing. And I went to a business conference about a month ago, and the audience was asked to comment, and a lot of people in the audience were saying they'd be happy for the lines to be frozen where they are if they got NATO membership. And then they asked the same question again about 20 minutes later, but would they be happy to freeze the war but without NATO membership? And only about 10% less of the audience said that they'd be happy with that, which is a little bit alarming. But again, the general, I mean, he's obviously a very experienced man, very intelligent. He's got a lot of vital experience for this role. And but what he said before the election and on campaign trails and what he says after and does afterwards might be two different things. Again, I think it's pretty arrogant to be coming in here telling the locals what to do in that respect.
Simon, in the introduction, I mentioned that your company provides security risk management and training and business support. How is it going, and what do you count as success so far?
Training NGOs is always very rewarding. So we do driver training courses and medical training courses, and also something called HEAT, which is Hostile Environment Awareness Training, so safety and security courses. That's always very rewarding. It's always good to know that you send people out into the country to do humanitarian work, and you've made them a great deal safer than they would have been if they had no course from you or another company. So those are always high points. There's a lot of people sniffing around on recce's, a lot of companies wanting to get involved here. A story that I keep hearing, or a comment that I keep hearing, is that people are not sure. One of the reasons why a lot of Western companies are holding back is because they don't know who to talk to here. In a lot of cases, they see a great turnover in government staff and ministries, and in some cases also in private companies that they want to do business with. People get drafted or whatever. So that's one of the big problems: finding the right people to talk to and maintaining a good contact, maintaining a relationship with them.
Just interested on a personal note, I mean, you didn't have to go and live and do what you're doing in Kyiv. What motivated you to do it?
Well, I was helping out on quite a direct way back for a few months more, 8 months back in 2022, and then after that, I wanted to see what I could do to help the business community and the economy, and to encourage Western support to come over, Western companies to come over here and get involved before the war stopped, which could be a while yet, unfortunately.
And how long I mean, you're in it for the long haul then, you're committed?
Yeah, I think well, I'm certainly committed from a business perspective, but emotionally, I'm also committed. I think this is a fight worth winning, and it's something that everybody needs to get behind back in the West. There's a lot of chatter about World War III and all this sort of nonsense. Yeah, these people need to get their heads together and support Ukraine.
When you say, a lot of chat about World War III and calling it nonsense, I mean, what would you like to communicate from where you are right now that you think the Western, the outside world really misunderstand about Ukraine? What is the one thing that you would like to share?
I think they misunderstand the threat from Russia. To be honest with you, I mean the thought of Russia invading. I mean they might test the water by minor border incursions, but the thought of the Russian army invading NATO, a NATO country, is to me preposterous. I mean, I've seen them fight personally, and they're a joke. And even at the start of the war here, I mean, there's obviously a lot of them here, and they got a lot of ammunition and weaponry, etc. But even at the start of the war, when they had all their units up to strength, they still couldn't beat the Ukrainians. I mean, the Ukrainians obviously fought tooth and nail, and they had a lot of Western support from some companies, at least, even at the start. But I think the threat from Russia to NATO is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings with a lot of people.
Simon, it's been really good speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.